The liberation of Bergen-Belsen in April 1945 stands as one of the most harrowing moments of World War II. Located in northern Germany, Bergen-Belsen was originally set up as a prisoner of war camp but became infamous as a concentration camp in 1943. Thousands of Jews, including Anne Frank and her sister Margot, were imprisoned there. When British forces under General Montgomery arrived to liberate the camp, they were met with a scene of unimaginable horror. The camp was overcrowded, with tens of thousands of prisoners crammed into inadequate, unsanitary barracks. Disease, particularly typhus, had spread uncontrollably. Many prisoners were too weak to move, and countless bodies were left unburied, scattered across the camp. The survivors, many of whom were emaciated and near death, were suffering from both physical and psychological trauma. The liberation revealed the full scale of Nazi atrocities. The British soldiers were shocked by the inhumanity they encountered, and the images of the camp's conditions, starving survivors and piles of corpses, were widely circulated in the media, exposing the world to the brutal realities of the Holocaust. The scenes from Bergen-Belsen, along with the liberation of other camps, played a crucial role in changing public understanding of the Holocaust's magnitude. The Einsatzgruppen Massacres were among the most brutal and horrifying chapters of the Holocaust, reflecting the Nazi regime's increasingly genocidal policies in Eastern Europe. The Einsatzgruppen mobile killing units composed primarily of SS officers, police, and other collaborators were tasked with following the German army as it advanced into Soviet territory, beginning in June 1941, during Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. These death squads were responsible for carrying out mass executions, primarily targeting Jews, but also Roma, political dissidents, Soviet prisoners of war, and others deemed undesirable by the Nazi regime. They would often round up entire communities, families, children, the elderly, and march them to remote locations such as forests, ravines, and open fields. The victims were made to dig their own graves, then were shot in mass executions, left to die in mass graves, or, in some cases, burned alive. The sheer scale of the killings was staggering. The Einsatzgruppen murdered an estimated 1.5 million people by the time the operations were scaled down in 1943. One of the most infamous massacres took place at Babi Yar, near Kiev, where over 33,000 Jews were systematically murdered in just 2 days in September 1941. Similar mass killings occurred in locations across Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic states, where entire Jewish communities were wiped out. These executions were carried out with terrifying efficiency and cold brutality. Often, the victims were not only Jews but also Soviet political officers, Roma, partisans, and anyone suspected of opposing the German occupation. The Einsatzgruppen worked in close collaboration with local collaborators, who helped identify victims and sometimes actively participated in the killings. The lack of resistance, the methodical nature of the killings, and the absolute disregard for human life underscored the extreme dehumanization carried out by the Nazis. The Einsatzgruppen were a precursor to the later, more systematic mass murder carried out in extermination camps like Auschwitz, but the massacres they conducted were profoundly different in their personal, hands-on brutality. The killers often shot their victims at point-blank range, creating horrific scenes of violence and terror. These executions were not just military operations, they were acts of deliberate racial extermination, aimed at erasing entire populations from the face of Europe. In terms of psychological toll, the Einsatzgruppen massacres also had a devastating effect on the perpetrators. Many of the men involved in these operations were left emotionally shattered, and the trauma of their actions would contribute to the mental scars of the Nazi officers and soldiers involved in the genocide. The Einsatzgruppen massacres represent the heart of Nazi brutality in Eastern Europe, an early and chilling manifestation of their genocidal goals. They are a stark reminder of the lengths to which the Nazis were willing to go in their campaign to annihilate entire peoples. The victims of these massacres were not just statistics, but individuals with names, families, and lives cut short by unspeakable violence. These massacres, though largely overlooked for many years, have come to symbolize the horrifying efficiency of Nazi genocidal practices in the East. They serve as a grim reminder of the depths of human cruelty and the devastating impact of state-sponsored racism and hatred. The memory of the Einsatzgruppen massacres remains vital to understanding the total scale of the Holocaust and ensuring that such horrors are never forgotten. The death marches, which took place in the final months of World War II, stand as one of the most harrowing and tragic chapters of the Holocaust. As the Allied forces advanced across Nazi-controlled territories in 1944 and 1945, the Nazis, fearing imminent defeat, began evacuating their concentration and labor camps. Rather than allowing the prisoners to be liberated, they forced thousands of men, women, and children already weakened by years of starvation, disease, and brutal forced labor on long, grueling marches across Germany and into other areas under Nazi control. The prisoners were often forced to march for miles on end, without adequate food, water, or rest. Many of them were already emaciated from the relentless deprivation they had suffered in the camps. The marches took place under freezing winter conditions or scorching summer heat, with little regard for the suffering of the prisoners. Guards would march behind them with orders to shoot anyone who fell behind, attempted to escape, or could not continue the journey due to exhaustion. As they marched, the prisoners faced constant violence, brutal treatment, and the harshest conditions imaginable. Many collapsed from physical exhaustion, while others succumbed to malnutrition, disease, or exposure. Those who survived the journey were often left to face the horrifying prospect of being placed in another camp or faced with death at the hands of their captors. The Nazis sought to erase all evidence of their atrocities as they retreated, and the death marches became one of their final, tragic acts of cruelty. The death marches were a stark testament to the extreme brutality and cruelty of the Nazi regime. They were an intentional effort to eliminate the prisoners who had endured the horrors of the concentration camps, a final attempt to destroy those who might live to tell the world about the atrocities they had witnessed. The marches claimed the lives of tens of thousands of men, women, and children, and they remain a haunting reminder of the depths of human suffering inflicted by the Nazis. Despite the horror of these forced evacuations, many survivors of the death marches went on to bear witness to the crimes of the Holocaust, ensuring that the memory of the horrors they endured would be preserved. The death marches symbolize the final chapter of Nazi persecution, but they also underscore the enduring resilience of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming suffering. During the German occupation of France from 1940 to 1944, the French resistance emerged as a powerful and crucial force in the fight against Nazi tyranny. The resistance was made up of a diverse group of individuals, men and women from all walks of life, including students, workers, soldiers, intellectuals, and members of marginalized communities. While some joined out of a desire to fight back against the Nazi occupation, others were motivated by deep moral convictions, a commitment to justice, or a refusal to live under oppression. The resistance operated under extreme conditions, facing brutal repression from the German occupiers and their collaborators. Members of the resistance risked their lives daily to sabotage German military operations, disrupt transportation lines, and carry out acts of guerrilla warfare. They used every tool at their disposal: intelligence gathering, secret radio transmissions, underground printing presses, and even direct attacks on German soldiers and infrastructure. One of the most significant contributions of the resistance was providing invaluable intelligence to the Allies. This included information on German troop movements, locations of military installations, and critical data that would later assist in the success of Allied operations, including the D-Day landings in 1944. The resistance also played a key role in helping down Allied airmen escape and in guiding them to safety across the Pyrenees to Spain, where they could then return to Allied forces. In addition to sabotage and intelligence work, the resistance helped lay the groundwork for the liberation of France. As the Allies advanced, the resistance intensified its operations, cutting off German supply lines, carrying out ambushes, and weakening the German military presence in France. Their efforts contributed to the success of the Allied invasion and the eventual liberation of France in 1944. Despite their pivotal role, members of the resistance often faced immense personal sacrifice. Many were arrested, tortured, and executed by the Gestapo. The French people who supported the resistance risked their own safety, hiding resistance fighters, providing food and shelter, and facilitating escape routes for Jews and other persecuted groups. The courage and ingenuity of the French resistance were instrumental in the eventual defeat of Nazi forces in France. While their operations were often carried out in the shadows, their impact on the war effort was monumental. The resistance symbolizes not only the courage to resist tyranny but the enduring power of ordinary people to stand up for freedom and justice, even in the face of overwhelming oppression. The legacy of the French resistance lives on as a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the determination to fight for liberty, no matter the cost.
The Kindertransport was one of the most heart-wrenching yet profoundly significant rescue operations during the Holocaust, taking place between 1938 and 1940. As Nazi persecution of Jews intensified across Europe, particularly following the Kristallnacht pogrom in November 1938, Jewish children in Nazi-occupied territories were increasingly at risk of violence, deportation, and death. In response to the growing crisis, Britain initiated a humanitarian mission that would come to be known as the Kindertransport, meaning children's transport in German. Over the course of the operation, approximately 10,000 Jewish children, mostly from Germany, Austria, and Czechoslovakia, were transported to Britain, often without their parents. These children, ranging from infants to teenagers, were placed on trains and sent away from their homes, many of them never seeing their families again. The children's departure was organized through Jewish and British charities, with the support of both the British government and private citizens. The children were taken in by foster families, orphanages, and institutions across Britain, where they were given sanctuary from the horrors unfolding in Nazi Europe. While many of these children survived the war, the trauma of separation from their parents left an indelible mark on them. Most children were told that their parents would follow them shortly, yet for many, the promise of reunion would never be realized. Parents who were left behind often perished in concentration camps, and the pain of being separated from loved ones remained with these children for the rest of their lives. The Kindertransport is remembered not only for the lives it saved but for the immense emotional cost it exacted on those involved. The operation stands as a testament to the power of compassion and the willingness of individuals and governments to act in the face of rising hatred. Yet, it also serves as a reminder of the deep, irreversible trauma caused by the separation of families during one of the darkest periods in history. For many of the children who survived, the legacy of the Kindertransport became intertwined with their own identity, as they carried the scars of displacement, loss, and survival. The rescue mission itself is now commemorated as a symbol of hope amidst atrocity, a beacon of humanity in the face of inhumanity. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, which began in April 1943, stands as one of the most powerful symbols of Jewish resistance during the Holocaust. In the face of the systematic and brutal extermination policies of the Nazis, a group of Jewish fighters in the Warsaw Ghetto took an extraordinary stand against their oppressors. Armed with a small number of weapons, mostly handguns, grenades, and homemade explosives, they chose to resist the Nazi attempt to liquidate the ghetto and deport its remaining inhabitants to extermination camps. The uprising began when the Nazis, seeking to round up the last of the ghetto's inhabitants, entered the area with overwhelming force. The Jewish resistance fighters, primarily members of the ZOB, Jewish Combat Organization, and ZZW, Jewish Military Union, organized themselves to confront the German soldiers. Despite being vastly outnumbered and undersupplied, they fought fiercely, setting fire to German supply vehicles, ambushing soldiers, and taking advantage of the narrow, maze-like streets of the ghetto to delay the German advance. Their resistance lasted for over a month, a remarkable feat given the disparity in power and resources. Although the uprising ended in the complete destruction of the ghetto and the murder of many of its inhabitants, the fighters' bravery and determination left a lasting legacy. It was a poignant act of defiance against the Nazis, showing that even in the most dire of circumstances, the will to resist dehumanization and oppression could not be crushed. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising became an enduring symbol of Jewish courage and resistance. It not only highlighted the strength of those who fought back against the Nazis but also served as a reminder that resistance, no matter how small or hopeless it might seem, has the power to inspire and to affirm human dignity in the face of brutality. Today, the uprising remains a defining moment in the history of the Holocaust, honored annually on Yom HaShoah as a symbol of defiance, hope, and the relentless fight for freedom. Dachau, established in 1933 as one of the first Nazi concentration camps, became a symbol of the unimaginable suffering endured by millions of prisoners throughout World War II. Initially intended to imprison political opponents of the Nazi regime, Dachau quickly evolved into a site of forced labor, brutal punishment, and systematic starvation. Over the years, it housed Jews, Romani people, political prisoners, and others deemed undesirable by the Nazis, subjected to unspeakable cruelty. As Allied forces advanced toward Germany in 1945, the Nazis, in a desperate attempt to conceal their atrocities, began evacuating prisoners from Dachau and other camps. They forced the inmates onto grueling death marches, marching them under the threat of gunfire and exhaustion toward other camps in the interior of Germany. Many died along the way, succumbing to fatigue, starvation, and the constant barrage of gunshots from Nazi guards, who often shot those who could no longer keep up with the brutal pace.
However, the liberation of Dachau by American forces on April 29, 1945, marked a turning point. The surviving prisoners, their bodies frail and emaciated from years of deprivation, were freed from their captors. But the horrors they had witnessed, forced labor, mass executions, medical experiments, and the systematic destruction of human dignity, could not be erased. The survivors of Dachau became essential witnesses, bearing testimony to the atrocities they had endured and ensuring that the history of the camp, and the genocide perpetrated by the Nazis, would never be forgotten. The liberation of Dachau was not just a military victory, it was a profound moment of reckoning. It symbolized the triumph of humanity over an unimaginable evil, but also the beginning of a long process of bearing witness and educating future generations about the horrors of the Holocaust. The survivors' stories have kept the memory of Dachau and the millions who suffered in similar camps alive, ensuring that the lessons of the past continue to shape our world today. In October 1943, Denmark stood as a rare beacon of hope during one of the darkest chapters of the Holocaust. As the Nazi regime intensified its efforts to deport Jews to concentration camps, the Danish resistance, together with ordinary citizens, undertook a daring and heroic mission to save the lives of over 7,000 Jews. When the Nazis ordered the arrest and deportation of Denmark's Jewish population, the response from the Danish people was swift and resolute. The Danish resistance, aware of the impending threat, worked alongside courageous civilians, including fishermen, doctors, and local leaders, to smuggle Jews across the Øresund Strait into neutral Sweden, where they would be safe from Nazi persecution. The escape routes were perilous, often under the cover of night, with hidden boats and makeshift shelters along the way. The Danish resistance and the public's collective action thwarted the Nazis' plans, and the vast majority of Denmark's Jewish population was spared from deportation to the death camps. This incredible act of defiance, carried out by people who risked their own lives to protect their Jewish neighbors, stands as one of the most remarkable examples of moral courage in history. The rescue of Denmark's Jews in 1943 not only saved thousands of lives but also demonstrated the profound power of collective resistance against tyranny. It serves as a testament to the extraordinary bravery of individuals and communities who, in the face of overwhelming oppression, chose to stand on the side of humanity and compassion. The Danish rescue operation remains one of the most powerful symbols of resistance to Nazi brutality, showing that, even in the darkest times, courage and moral clarity can prevail. The Babi Yar massacre, which took place in September 1941, stands as one of the most horrifying atrocities of the Holocaust. In the ravine of Babi Yar, located in Kiev, Ukraine, Nazi forces, aided by local Ukrainian collaborators, rounded up nearly 34,000 Jewish men, women, and children. These victims were gathered from across the city and brought to the ravine, where they were forced to undress before being shot in cold blood. The executioners spared no one. Families, the elderly, infants, and the infirm were all brutally murdered in a series of mass shootings. The bodies were left in hastily dug mass graves, a chilling testament to the scale of the atrocity. Over the following years, tens of thousands of others, including Romani people, Soviet prisoners of war, and Ukrainian nationalists, would also be killed at Babi Yar, making it one of the largest mass executions during the Nazi occupation of the Soviet Union. This massacre marked a turning point in the Nazi regime's approach to mass murder, as it was among the first of many similar atrocities committed in the occupied territories of the Soviet Union. It represented the brutal shift from organized ghettoization to outright extermination by bullets, foreshadowing the later industrialized murder that would take place in extermination camps such as Auschwitz. In the years that followed, Soviet authorities suppressed the memory of Babi Yar, fearing the political consequences of acknowledging the scale of Nazi crimes, especially as the Soviet Union's relationship with Ukraine became more complicated. However, despite these efforts to erase its memory, the massacre remained a symbol of the horrific depths of Nazi brutality. In the decades since, Babi Yar has come to represent both the scale of the Holocaust and the broader human cost of hatred, oppression, and indifference. The invasion of Italy, July 9, 1943, Sicily, Italy. The Allied invasion of Sicily, codenamed Operation Husky, was the beginning of the Italian campaign and marked a critical turning point in the Mediterranean theater of World War II. After the successful landing on the island, the Allies quickly advanced, defeating the Italian forces and forcing the German military to intervene. The invasion led to the fall of Mussolini's fascist government and the eventual surrender of Italy. However, the fight in Italy would continue for several more years as German forces attempted to hold the country. The campaign was marked by brutal battles in harsh terrain and the eventual liberation of much of Italy by 1945. From May 26 to June 4, 1940, the world witnessed one of the most extraordinary feats of courage and survival in military history, the Dunkirk evacuation, or Operation Dynamo. As German forces swept through Western Europe during World War II, the British and French armies found themselves cornered at the French port city of Dunkirk, surrounded on all sides by advancing enemy troops. With the German forces closing in, there seemed to be no escape, and the imminent threat of annihilation loomed large. In the face of overwhelming odds, a desperate, makeshift evacuation was launched. The British Navy, along with a fleet of civilian boats, fishing vessels, and merchant ships, embarked on a daring rescue mission under constant German air and artillery attack. Over the course of 9 days, more than 330,000 British and French soldiers were evacuated from the beaches of Dunkirk, many of them leaving behind their equipment and weapons in the process. The evacuation was fraught with peril, but the bravery of the soldiers and the resourcefulness of the civilian volunteers played a pivotal role in its success. Despite relentless bombing raids by the Luftwaffe and constant artillery fire from the German forces, the evacuation remained largely intact. The sight of small boats ferrying soldiers from the beaches to waiting warships became an enduring symbol of hope, resilience, and unity in the face of adversity. It was a rare moment of triumph in the early days of World War II, when the Allies had suffered a series of devastating defeats. The success of Operation Dynamo was not just a military victory, it was a moral one. It became a beacon of determination for the British people, who rallied behind the knowledge that, despite the chaos and destruction surrounding them, they could still fight. The evacuation of Dunkirk allowed the Allies to maintain a fighting force in the war and kept hope alive at a time when it seemed like all was lost. It is often remembered as a moment of miraculous survival, a testament to human resilience and the unbreakable spirit of those who refused to give in to despair. On August 25, 1944, the liberation of Paris marked one of the most poignant and significant moments in World War II. After 4 years of brutal Nazi occupation, the French capital, once a symbol of culture, freedom, and resilience, finally saw the dawn of liberation. The city's residents, who had endured the horrors of occupation, rose up in defiance against the German forces, joining with the advancing Allied troops in a collective push to expel the Nazis. Led by General Charles de Gaulle and the Free French forces, along with the advancing American, British, and Canadian forces, the Allies fought their way through the city's streets, facing fierce German resistance. The battle for Paris was intense, and although the cost was high, the triumph was overwhelming. As the German forces began to retreat, the liberation became not just a military victory but a moral one, proof that the tide of war was turning in favor of the Allies. On that day, Parisians flooded the streets, singing, dancing, and celebrating their long-awaited freedom. The joy was palpable, as people waved French flags, embraced soldiers, and wept for the city they thought they had lost forever. The sounds of jubilant celebration filled the air, a stark contrast to the silence that had dominated under Nazi rule. It was a moment of reclaiming identity, of reaffirming that resistance could and would overcome tyranny. The liberation of Paris was not just a victory for the French, it was a pivotal turning point in the war. The success of the Allies in Paris opened the door for further advancements in Europe, leading to the eventual defeat of Nazi Germany. It was a day that marked the beginning of the end of the war in Europe, but it was also a testament to the enduring spirit of the people, the resilience of the French resistance, and the power of freedom. The attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941, Hawaii, USA. On the morning of December 7, 1941, the Japanese Imperial Navy launched a surprise attack on the United States Naval Base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The attack was intended to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet and prevent American interference in Japan's imperial expansion across Asia and the Pacific. In less than 2 hours, the Japanese destroyed or severely damaged 8 battleships, nearly 200 aircraft, and killed over 2,400 people. This attack led the United States to formally enter World War II, both in the Pacific and European theaters, marking a pivotal moment in global history. The bombing of Pearl Harbor also united the American public, who had been divided over joining the war, and turned the U.S. into a major player in the Allied war effort. From November 20, 1945, to October 1, 1946, in the devastated city of Nuremberg, Germany, the Allied powers conducted a series of landmark trials that would forever change the course of justice in the modern world. The Nuremberg trials were established to hold Nazi war criminals accountable for their crimes during World War II, marking the first time in history that individuals were tried for war crimes on an international stage. 12 high-ranking Nazi officials, including Hermann Göring, Rudolf Hess, and other prominent members of the Nazi regime, were charged with crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crimes against peace. Several were sentenced to death by hanging, while others received lengthy prison sentences. These trials not only addressed the atrocities committed during the Holocaust but also highlighted the broader scope of Nazi aggression, which included the plundering of occupied territories, the enslavement of populations, and the deliberate targeting of civilians in warfare. One of the most profound legal outcomes of the Nuremberg trials was the establishment of the principle that individuals could be held accountable for their actions, regardless of whether they were acting under orders. The defense of just following orders was rejected, setting a crucial precedent for future international law. The trials underscored the moral responsibility of individuals for their participation in wartime atrocities, and the ruling helped shape the development of modern international criminal law. The Nuremberg trials were pivotal in the post-war rebuilding of Europe, both physically and morally. They helped establish a foundation for human rights in the fight against impunity, leading to the creation of institutions like the United Nations and the International Criminal Court. They also served as a stark reminder of the horrors of war and the importance of preventing future genocides. The legacy of the Nuremberg trials endures in the continued efforts to ensure justice for victims of war crimes, holding perpetrators accountable and reinforcing the global commitment to preventing crimes against humanity. On August 6, 1945, the world witnessed a moment that would forever alter the course of history. The United States dropped the first atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The bomb, codenamed Little Boy, unleashed the terrifying and unprecedented power of nuclear energy, creating a blinding flash of light followed by a massive explosion that flattened the city in an instant. By the end of the year, it was estimated that around 140,000 people had died, either from the immediate effects of the explosion or from the lingering consequences of radiation sickness. Entire neighborhoods were obliterated, and the survivors, many of whom suffered from severe burns and radiation-related illnesses, were left to grapple with the unfathomable loss of life and the devastation around them. The bombing of Hiroshima was followed just 3 days later by the bombing of Nagasaki, which contributed to Japan's surrender and the eventual end of World War II. But the devastation wrought by these bombings was not without profound ethical questions. The unprecedented scale of destruction and the long-term effects of radiation on human health raised serious concerns about the use of such weapons in warfare. The atomic bomb ushered in the nuclear age, forever changing the nature of conflict and posing complex moral dilemmas about the balance between military strategy and human life. The events of August 6, 1945, and the subsequent suffering of Hiroshima's survivors remain a stark reminder of the destructive power of nuclear weapons, and a call for vigilance in ensuring such devastation is never repeated. The shadow of Hiroshima continues to hang over global geopolitics, reminding humanity of the need for peace and the careful stewardship of the technologies we create. On June 6, 1944, a momentous operation unfolded along the coast of Normandy, France. Operation Overlord, more commonly known as D-Day. It was one of the largest amphibious invasions in history, a coordinated effort involving American, British, Canadian, and other Allied forces. Their mission was clear: to liberate Western Europe from the grip of Nazi occupation and strike a decisive blow against Nazi Germany. The landings began before dawn, with thousands of soldiers storming the 5 beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword, each one fiercely defended by German forces. The sound of exploding shells and the shrill whistle of incoming artillery filled the air as machine guns raked across the landing crafts. The sea ran red with blood, and the sands of Normandy were soaked with the sacrifices of young men fighting for freedom. Despite the ferocious German resistance and the heavy losses on the beaches, the Allies managed to establish a foothold. The soldiers, many of whom were seeing combat for the first time, pressed on, pushing through the defenses, fighting for every inch of ground. D-Day was not just a military operation, it was a turning point in the war. It marked the beginning of the liberation of France and set in motion the eventual downfall of Nazi Germany. The courage, determination, and sacrifices of the soldiers who fought on that fateful day turned the tide of history, giving hope to millions who had been living under the shadow of tyranny. The success of the landings paved the way for the liberation of much of Western Europe, forever changing the course of World War II. The Battle of Stalingrad, August 23, 1942 to February 2, 1943, Stalingrad, Soviet Union. The Battle of Stalingrad remains one of the most intense and pivotal confrontations of World War II. Beginning in the summer of 1942, the city of Stalingrad became a symbol of Soviet resilience and German ambition. The Nazis, determined to capture the city named after Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, launched an all-out assault. What followed was a brutal urban warfare campaign that tore the city apart. As the battle raged on through the winter, the Soviet forces encircled the German Sixth Army, cutting them off from reinforcements and supplies. The harsh conditions, freezing temperatures, starvation, and constant bombardment led to enormous casualties on both sides. When the Germans finally surrendered in February 1943, it marked a turning point in the war, signaling the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany on the Eastern Front. The liberation of Holocaust prisoners, April 13, 1945, Farselben, Germany. The chaos of war had finally reached its peak, and the prisoners aboard the train at Farselben, Germany, found themselves crammed in a hopeless situation. Approximately 2,500 men and women, the remnants of Nazi concentration camps, were packed into train cars, barely alive, their bodies frail from starvation, some standing, others too weak to remain standing. They were being transported towards their Scienstadt, where their fate seemed sealed, death. But the hand of fate intervened unexpectedly. On a seemingly ordinary road, a squad of American soldiers, on the wrong highway at the right time, came upon the train. With no ceremony, no prior knowledge, the soldiers halted the train. As the doors flung open and sunlight poured in, the prisoners, once resigned to their fate, were faced with an impossible truth: they were free. Sergeant George C. Gross, who was among the liberators, described the scene as laughing in joy, if it were possible to call it laughing. What followed was not a celebration but a moment of pure shock, as the prisoners could hardly comprehend the reality of their newfound freedom. In 1939, just before the horrors of war tore her family apart, a mother in Vienna handed her young daughter a small music box. It was delicate, simple, but precious beyond measure, for it played a lullaby, the song of home, the sound of safety, of love. "When you hear it, think of home," the mother whispered, knowing they might never return. The child carried that music box through the years of exile, through the suffocating fear of concentration camps, and through the chaos of war. Its melody, though faint, became her silent companion, a fragile thread linking her to a past that seemed to vanish with every passing day. In the darkest moments, the tune was a reminder of the warmth of a mother's love, of the home she had once known. Decades later, when the child had become an old woman, she wound the music box once more, her hands shaking with the weight of time and memory. As the lullaby played, its notes faint and trembling, the small apartment filled with the song of the past. The melody, now distant and fragile, still carried the echoes of a home long gone. Tears fell, but not only for what was lost. These tears were for the fact that, after all the years, the song had survived. It had endured the ravages of history, the destruction of her world, and the silent wounds of time. The music box, a tiny artifact of love and loss, proved that even in the face of everything trying to erase her story, some part of it remained unbroken, untouched by the years. The song had lived, and with it, so had she. In 1942, during the Nazi occupation of Amsterdam, a young Jewish woman named Judith faced the unimaginable when her home was raided. In the chaos, as soldiers ransacked everything she held dear, one item caught her eye: a single shard from the broken mirror that once hung in her home. Despite the turmoil, she quietly wrapped it in cloth and hid it in her pocket, knowing that whatever happened next, the small piece of her past would be a lifeline. As Judith was deported to a concentration camp, that shard of glass remained with her, a fragment of a world she had lost. In the brutal reality of the camp, where prisoners were stripped of their names and their identities, Judith would use the shard to look at her reflection. It was her only way to remember who she was, to see her face and, with it, hold on to her humanity. When the war ended, and Judith survived, the shard of glass was all that remained of her old life. She would later say, "It showed me that I was still someone, not only a number." The small fragment, cracked but unbroken, became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in the face of dehumanization, one's identity, no matter how fragile, could endure. Today, the shard still lies in a museum display case, a testament to the strength of the human spirit. It is cracked, yes, but unbroken, just as Judith was. In 1944, as the horrors of the Holocaust spread through Hungary, a young boy named Miklos was torn from his family and forced onto a deportation train. As he prepared to board, his father, in a final act of love, slipped a small matchbox into Miklos's hand. "For warmth when you are cold," his father whispered, his voice trembling with the weight of their parting. Inside the matchbox, Miklos found not matches, but 3 tiny seeds, carefully wrapped in paper. They seemed so small, so fragile, yet they carried with them the hope of something beyond the terror that surrounded him. Miklos survived the unimaginable horrors of the camps, and after the war, when he was finally able to return to life, he carried those seeds with him. He planted them in a small garden behind his new home, tending to them with the care of someone who had learned the true value of life's smallest miracles. As the seasons passed, the seeds grew into 3 tall sunflowers, their golden faces turned toward the sun, a living testament to his father's love. Miklos called them his father's fire, the warmth of his father's spirit, the light of his memory, and the resilience of love that could bloom even after the darkest of winters. In the frozen Polish forest of 1943, where the shadows of war loomed heavy and the cold seemed to freeze even the memory of warmth, a group of partisans sought refuge from German patrols. Among them was Rosa, a young woman whose heart carried an unbearable burden. She had lost her entire family to the violence of the war. In the stillness of the forest, with only the sound of the wind and the crunch of snow underfoot, Rosa took a scrap of paper and, with trembling hands, wrote the names of her family. She buried the note under the snow, speaking softly, "So the earth will remember." It was a quiet, intimate act, an offering to the soil, a plea for remembrance that no one else could hear. When spring arrived and the snow began to melt, the note was lost to the earth, carried away by the flowing water, unseen and forgotten. But years later, after the war, when survivors returned to that same forest, they spoke of something strange and beautiful. The wildflowers that grew there were brighter, more vibrant than anywhere else in the forest. Some believed the flowers had blossomed from the very soil that had received Rosa's letter, a testament to her love, to the names that had been lost, and to the earth that had held her memory in its embrace. The note was never found, but in the brilliance of those flowers, Rosa's family was remembered, their names etched not just in the soil, but in the hearts of those who returned to the place where the earth itself had chosen to keep their memory alive. As the transports began to tear families apart and strip them of their homes, an elderly Jewish locksmith named Emil stood in his small workshop in Prague, knowing that the time had come. He locked the door one last time, his hands steady despite the weight of the moment. Turning to his grandson, he placed the key into his young hands and whispered, "Every door opens to memory." Emil never returned. The horrors of the war, the brutality of the deportations, consumed him along with so many others. But the key remained, a symbol of the home and the life that had been lost. After the war, Emil's grandson returned to the ruins of their street. The workshop was gone, nothing but rubble where memories once lived. Yet, he still held the key, the last link to his grandfather and the life they had shared. For the rest of his life, he carried it with him, polishing it every year on his grandfather's birthday. The key never opened a door. It never led to a home or a shop. But it opened something far deeper, the door to remembrance. It was a token of the past that could never be erased, a quiet, enduring symbol of love, loss, and the memories that survive even when everything else is gone. The Nuremberg trials, held from November 1945 to October 1946, were a landmark moment in history, marking the first time that individuals were held criminally accountable for atrocities committed during a war. These trials were conducted by the Allied powers, the United States, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and France, and took place in Nuremberg, Germany, the site of many Nazi party rallies. The primary aim was to bring Nazi war criminals to justice and to establish a legal precedent for prosecuting war crimes, crimes against humanity, and crimes against peace. The trials were groundbreaking for several reasons. 1. Legal accountability for individuals. The Nuremberg trials established the important principle that individuals, rather than entire nations or regimes, could be held accountable for crimes. This was crucial in shifting the focus from punishing entire groups or countries to holding individuals responsible for their actions. 2. The concept of crimes against humanity. The trials introduced the concept of crimes against humanity, a category that included atrocities such as genocide, enslavement, and the systematic persecution of ethnic, religious, and social groups. This principle was later codified in international law and became a cornerstone for subsequent war crimes tribunals, including those for the Rwandan genocide and the Yugoslav wars. 3. Defining genocide. The Nuremberg trials were instrumental in the development of the legal definition of genocide, a term that would later be formally defined in the 1948 United Nations Genocide Convention. The trials emphasized that acts of mass murder, forced displacement, and extermination were not just wartime crimes, but crimes against the very fabric of humanity. For justice for the victims, the Nuremberg trials were not just about punishing the perpetrators of Nazi crimes but also about acknowledging the suffering of the victims of the Holocaust and other wartime atrocities. Testimonies from survivors, including former prisoners of concentration camps and members of the resistance, played an essential role in documenting the horrors and providing evidence for the prosecutions. 5. Global impact. The legacy of the Nuremberg trials extends far beyond the courtroom. They set a legal and moral precedent for subsequent international courts, such as the International Criminal Court (ICC), and have shaped the development of international human rights law. The trials also influenced the way the world views justice for war crimes, paving the way for more rigorous mechanisms to address crimes committed by state actors. In the end, 24 high-ranking Nazi officials were prosecuted during the Nuremberg trials. 12 were sentenced to death by hanging, 3 were acquitted, and the rest received various sentences, including prison terms. The trials were not without controversy, particularly regarding the fairness of the process and the use of victors' justice, but they remain a monumental step in establishing accountability for war crimes and preventing future atrocities. The Nuremberg trials symbolized the global commitment to ensuring that such horrors would never again go unpunished. Hannah Senes is remembered as one of the most courageous Jewish resistance fighters of World War II. Born in Hungary in 1921, she moved to Palestine in 1939, where she joined the Zionist movement and became a member of the British Army's Special Operations Executive (SOE). In 1944, she was recruited for a daring mission to parachute into Nazi-occupied Europe as part of an operation to rescue Jews from deportation and assist in resistance efforts against the Nazis. Senes was sent to Hungary, where she aimed to help organize uprisings and facilitate the escape of Jews. Her mission, however, was quickly thwarted when she was captured by the Gestapo shortly after crossing into Hungary. Despite being subjected to brutal torture, Senes remained steadfast, refusing to betray her comrades or reveal any information about the resistance. On November 7, 1944, Senes was executed by the Nazis at the age of 23. Her defiance, courage, and unwavering commitment to the cause of freedom and justice made her a symbol of heroism. Her poem, Blessed is the Match, written before her capture, has become a poignant testament to her spirit and sacrifice. It is widely recited in both Israel and Hungary, where she is celebrated as a national hero. Hannah Senes' legacy lives on, not only through her resistance activities but also through the message of her poetry, which encapsulates the strength and courage that characterized the resistance efforts during the Holocaust. Her story continues to inspire countless individuals who honor her as a symbol of sacrifice, determination, and the fight for human dignity. The role of the Catholic Church during the Holocaust is complex and remains a subject of debate. While there were instances of silence or inaction from church leadership, particularly from Pope Pius XII, there were also countless individual acts of courage carried out by priests, nuns, and laypeople across Europe. Many Catholic clergy members, despite the risks to their own lives, helped protect Jews from Nazi persecution. In countries like France, Italy, Belgium, and Poland, Catholic institutions, including monasteries, convents, and orphanages, became sanctuaries for Jews. Religious orders often hid Jewish families, provided false identities, and helped them escape to safer areas. Some Catholic leaders even worked with the resistance movements to smuggle Jews out of occupied territories or to underground hiding places. One notable example is the story of the Sisters of St. Joseph in France, who sheltered Jewish children in their convents, and in Italy, numerous Catholic individuals provided assistance to Jewish refugees. In Belgium, Cardinal Lyon Lamel and other Catholic leaders facilitated efforts to hide Jewish families and smuggle them to safety. While Pope Pius XII's silence during the Holocaust has drawn significant criticism, especially due to his failure to publicly condemn the actions of the Nazis, these acts of heroism at the grassroots level were vital in saving thousands of Jewish lives. The true extent of the Catholic Church's involvement in the Holocaust is still debated, as it was often overshadowed by the broader political and diplomatic complexities of the war. However, the efforts of individual clergy members and Catholic communities provide a poignant reminder of the courage and compassion that persisted even in the darkest times. The White Rose Resistance Movement was a courageous group of German university students who bravely defied the Nazi regime during World War II. Led by siblings Hans and Sophie Scholl, along with fellow students like Christoph Probst and Alexander Schmorl, the group sought to oppose Nazi atrocities through non-violent means. They secretly printed and distributed anti-Nazi leaflets, calling on Germans to resist the regime and take a stand against the horrors it was inflicting on Jews and others. The group's leaflets denounced Nazi policies and urged citizens to act in the face of moral injustice, boldly condemning the regime's war crimes and genocidal actions. The White Rose members knew the risks involved, yet they continued to spread their message, believing that silence was complicity. In February 1943, Hans and Sophie Scholl were caught distributing their sixth leaflet at the University of Munich. They were arrested by the Gestapo, and after a swift trial, both were found guilty of treason and executed by guillotine. Christoph Probst was also executed alongside them. Their execution did not extinguish their message, however, and the White Rose's bravery became a powerful symbol of resistance in Nazi Germany. Their commitment to moral courage and their stand against tyranny continues to inspire generations. The Babi Yar massacre, one of the most horrific acts of mass murder during the Holocaust, took place in Kiev, Ukraine, on September 29 to 30, 1941. Over the course of 2 days, more than 34,000 Jewish men, women, and children were rounded up by the Nazi Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing units, and local collaborators. The victims were forced to march to the Babi Yar ravine, where they were shot in mass executions. This massacre was part of the Nazis' systematic plan to eliminate Jews and other targeted groups in Eastern Europe as part of the broader final solution. The victims were buried in mass graves, and the event was initially covered up by the Nazis, who sought to hide the scale of their crimes. It was not until years later that the true extent of the massacre was revealed to the world. The tragedy of Babi Yar is a grim reminder of the brutality of the Nazi regime and the horrific loss of life during the Holocaust. It is also a symbol of the many atrocities that occurred in the wake of the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union and the systematic nature of the genocide. The Soviet partisans played a crucial role in resisting the Nazis during the Holocaust, especially in the occupied territories of Belarus, Ukraine, and Poland. Operating primarily in the forests, they carried out sabotage missions, ambushed Nazi supply lines, and fought directly against German forces. Their knowledge of the terrain and guerrilla tactics made them formidable opponents. Beyond their military efforts, many Soviet partisans helped Jews in life-threatening ways. They aided in the escape of Jews from ghettos, provided them with food and shelter, and helped them survive in the forests. The Bielski partisans, one of the most renowned partisan groups, were instrumental in saving over 1,200 Jews. Their efforts were not just about survival, they demonstrated courage, solidarity, and a deep commitment to humanity even in the face of overwhelming odds. The story of the Soviet partisans highlights the strength of resistance movements during the Holocaust and underscores the importance of solidarity and compassion in times of unspeakable brutality. The survival of Jewish children in hiding during the Holocaust is one of the most poignant and heartbreaking aspects of the war. Many Jewish children were hidden by non-Jewish families, religious organizations, and resistance groups, often under false identities. These children lived in constant fear of being discovered, separated from their families, and forced to adapt to lives of secrecy. The trauma they experienced was profound, living in fear, often without the comfort of family or familiar surroundings. Yet, their resilience in the face of such immense challenges is nothing short of extraordinary. Many were eventually reunited with surviving family members after the war, though for some, the losses were permanent. The story of the hidden children is a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the incredible sacrifices made by those who risked their own lives to protect them. It also reflects the broader story of survival and defiance in the darkest times, and the lengths to which people would go to save the innocent from certain death. In the Warsaw Ghetto, the Ordnungsdienst, or Jewish ghetto police, were tasked with enforcing Nazi policies, including helping to round up Jews for deportation. While their role was inherently controversial, some members of the ghetto police secretly resisted the Nazis in small but significant ways. These individuals often risked their lives to provide food, medicine, and critical information to their fellow Jews, warning them of upcoming deportations and helping them hide. The story of the Jewish ghetto police reflects the moral complexity and the harsh choices that Jews had to make under Nazi oppression. Forced into positions of collaboration, some ghetto police still found ways to defy the Nazis, demonstrating that acts of compassion and resistance could exist even in the darkest circumstances. Their actions show how survival often required navigating impossible moral dilemmas in the face of brutality and death. The Dutch underground played a vital and courageous role in rescuing Jews during the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands. As the Nazis began mass deportations in 1943, the Dutch resistance intensified its efforts to save Jewish lives. Many ordinary Dutch citizens risked their lives to hide Jewish families in their homes, providing them with false identification and arranging escape routes to neutral countries like Sweden. The resistance also engaged in sabotage, targeting Nazi infrastructure, and assisted Jews in evading capture by smuggling them to safe locations or into hiding. Their actions were a powerful form of defiance against the Nazi regime, and they saved thousands of lives. The bravery of the Dutch underground serves as a testament to the impact that ordinary people, united by compassion and courage, can have in the face of overwhelming tyranny. These rescue efforts not only protected individuals but also reflected a broader spirit of resistance that stood against the dehumanizing forces of the Nazi occupation. The Kindertransport, an extraordinary rescue operation between 1938 and 1939, saved the lives of 10,000 Jewish children by transporting them from Nazi-occupied territories to Britain. The children were placed with foster families, in hostels, or on farms, far from the dangers of Nazi rule. While the Kindertransport spared them from immediate death, it left them separated from their families, many of whom perished in the Holocaust. For these children, the trauma of separation and the loss of their families were lifelong scars. The Kindertransport serves as one of the most heart-wrenching chapters of the Holocaust, illustrating both the hope that came with being rescued and the profound sorrow of losing everything else. It highlights the incredible resilience of these young survivors, many of whom grew up in Britain as orphans, forever marked by their early experiences. The story of the Kindertransport remains a poignant reminder of the impact of war on children, showing how, even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, the effort to save the innocent continued. It is both a testament to the compassion of those who made the transport possible and a reflection of the lasting trauma that the Holocaust imposed on its youngest victims. Bergen-Belsen, one of the most infamous Nazi concentration camps, was a site of unimaginable suffering. Over 70,000 prisoners died there due to starvation, disease, and neglect. When British forces liberated the camp on April 15, 1945, they encountered a scene of horror: thousands of emaciated survivors, many too weak to comprehend their freedom, and piles of bodies that were left to rot. The British immediately provided food, medical care, and shelter to the survivors, though the psychological and physical trauma they had endured remained with them for the rest of their lives. The liberation of Bergen-Belsen became one of the most striking symbols of the Holocaust's cruelty, with the survivors bearing witness to the atrocities that had taken place within the camp's walls. The events at Bergen-Belsen are a stark reminder of the depths of human suffering during the Holocaust and underscore the importance of global awareness and action to prevent such horrors from ever happening again. The camp's liberation stands not only as a moment of relief but as a painful testimony to the millions who perished in the Nazi death machine. The Jewish resistance in Slovakia, though smaller in scale compared to other European resistance movements, was a powerful example of defiance during the Holocaust. In collaboration with Czech and Slovak resistance groups, Jewish fighters engaged in various acts of sabotage against the Nazis. They also gathered vital intelligence for the Allies and assisted Jews in escaping to safer regions. One of the most notable events in the resistance was the Slovak National Uprising in 1944, a major anti-Nazi revolt in which Jews participated alongside other resistance fighters. The uprising aimed to liberate Slovakia from Nazi control, though it was ultimately suppressed by German forces. Despite the suppression of the uprising and the eventual defeat of the resistance, the courage of Jewish partisans in Slovakia left a lasting legacy. They showed that even in the face of overwhelming oppression, the will to resist, protect communities, and fight for freedom could not be easily extinguished. The story of Jewish resistance in Slovakia highlights the diverse forms of resistance, from armed rebellion to covert efforts, that were part of the broader struggle against the Nazis across Europe. Inside the horrors of Auschwitz, where every trace of humanity was systematically stripped away, a group of women in the textile workshop defied the Nazis in a quiet act of resistance. They took the threadbare scraps of fabric they were given and, in secret, embroidered names of loved ones, names of those lost, forbidden acts of remembrance in a place designed to erase identity. One young woman, Lena, stitched her sister's name onto the hem of her striped uniform, hiding it beneath the seam where it would be almost impossible to find. "If they erase us," she said softly, "this will remain." The thread she used was thin, the fabric worn from the relentless work and suffering, but the act itself was an act of defiance, of love, and of memory. It was a thread connecting the present to the past, a small but powerful assertion that no matter how much they tried to obliterate them, they could not erase their lives, their names, or their stories. When the camp was liberated, Lena's uniform was found, its fabric threadbare and frayed, but the name was still legible: Ruth. It was a simple word, a name, but it carried with it a profound truth. Even in the most desolate of places, even when everything else had been stripped away, someone had sewn a piece of humanity back into existence. Ruth's name survived, and in that survival, so did her memory, a testament to the resilience of love and identity in the face of unimaginable darkness. During the dark days of the German occupation of Paris in 1942, as the city was gripped by fear and uncertainty, a Catholic woman named Marguerite made a quiet but profound decision. When the French roundups began, she took in 2 Jewish children, hiding them in the safety of her cellar. To protect them, she lit a single candle every night, its soft flame a beacon of hope amidst the shadows. "As long as it burns, we are safe," she would tell them, offering both comfort and courage in a time when safety was a fragile illusion. One night, German soldiers came to search the street. As the sounds of boots drew nearer, Marguerite shielded the candle with her hands, her heart racing as she fought to keep the tiny flame alive. The soldiers passed, unaware of the lives hidden just below their feet, and the light remained unbroken. When the war ended, and the children, now grown, returned to the house, they would light a candle in the same corner of the cellar every year. It became a ritual, a symbol of the enduring love and sacrifice that had kept them safe. They called it the light that never went out, a testament to the quiet bravery of Marguerite and the sanctuary she had offered them during the darkest of times. The flame, though small, had burned long after the war ended, a symbol of survival, hope, and the kindness that defied the forces of hatred. In 1942, in the shadow of the Warsaw Ghetto, a young woman named Chana faced a choice no one should ever have to make, whether to leave behind her past and embrace the dangerous fight for survival, or to hold on to the memories that anchored her humanity. As the walls of the ghetto closed in and the uprising loomed, she tucked a photograph of her parents inside the lining of her boot, whispering, "So they will walk with me." It was a simple, quiet gesture, but one filled with immense meaning. The faces of her parents, though only captured on paper, would stay close, guiding her through the brutality that awaited. As she joined the resistance, the photograph became worn, the faces fading beneath sweat, dust, and the relentless march of time. The boot's lining, frayed from the constant pressure, mirrored the toll the war had taken on her. But no matter how torn or faded the picture became, Chana refused to remove it. It was not just a memory, but a lifeline, a symbol of love, of the life she had lost, and of the hope she carried. When she fell during the fighting, the rescuers found her lifeless body, a happy-raised image pressed against her skin. In that final act, the photograph remained with her, faint, yet unyielding, a remembrance that would follow her until the very end. The photograph, the last fragment of her past, was buried with her, a silent testament to the love that death could never sever. It was a quiet rebellion against the horrors of the world, a final act of remembrance, carried through the rubble of war. The violin of Silence, Vilnius, 1943. A musician named Marek, once a concert violinist, carried his instrument into the Vilnius ghetto. Forbidden to perform, he played quietly in the attic each night, the bow barely touching the strings so only his daughter could hear. When the deportations began, he buried the violin beneath the floorboards with a note, "Play again when the world remembers us." The violin was found decades later, its wood warped but intact. It now rests in a museum, a silent witness to a melody that survived without sound. In 1942, within the bleak confines of the Lodz ghetto, a teenage boy named Aaron found a way to give his younger sister something precious every day, his daily ration of bread. It was a small, dark piece, barely enough to sustain one person, but Aaron, driven by love, shared it with her each morning, despite his own hunger. As the days wore on, his sister fell ill, too weak to even eat the bread. Yet, Aaron's devotion never wavered. Even when she could no longer lift the crust to her lips, he still placed half of it beside her bed, whispering softly, "So you won't be hungry in your dreams." Each day, the piece remained untouched, waiting for her to regain her strength. When the ghetto was liquidated, and Aaron was taken to the camps, the bed was found empty. But beneath his sister's pillow, hidden away with quiet care, lay dozens of hardened crusts untouched, saved for him. Years later, Aaron, now a survivor of the camps, would speak of his sister's bread as his inheritance of love. In the midst of unfathomable suffering and starvation, her act of saving the bread was a powerful, silent gesture of hope. Even in the darkest moments, when the world seemed to have taken everything, kindness endured. The crusts, hardened by time, became a symbol of a love that could not be consumed by hunger or death. In 1944, amidst the suffocating confinement of their Scienstadt, an elderly man named Samuel sat in the crowded barracks, his heart heavy with the weight of impending doom. Knowing his time was short, he wrote a final letter to his son in Switzerland, a letter born not of luxury, but of necessity. With no paper to spare, Samuel used the blank space between the old, confiscated lines of a prayer book, his words stitched together on the fragile remnants of what once held sacred. "If this reaches you," he wrote with trembling hands, "remember not the walls that held us, but the songs we sang inside them." His words, though simple, carried a profound message of defiance and love, that even in the face of unimaginable suffering, there could still be a spark of humanity, a shared joy found in music, in memory, in the act of surviving with grace. Before his deportation to Auschwitz, Samuel hid the page beneath a loose floorboard, knowing that his survival was uncertain. But after the war, a Red Cross worker discovered the letter, its ink faded and blurred by moisture and time, and forwarded it to his surviving son. The letter now rests in a museum, stained with the passage of years, a testament to the resilience of a father's love. It speaks not only for Samuel but for millions whose voices were silenced before they could share their final words. Yet, in the spaces between the lines of ink and tears, the message endured, a father's blessing, carried through time, reminding us that even in the darkest of times, love and memory cannot be imprisoned. The Hidden Doll, Krakow, 1943. In the Krakow ghetto, a father secretly hollowed out his daughter's wooden doll. Each night, after curfew, he placed small slips of paper inside names, dates, fragments of prayers. "These are our memories," he told her quietly. "If we are gone, someone will know we lived." When the liquidation of the ghetto began, the little girl clutched the doll tightly as soldiers shouted and families were torn apart. She was later found by partisans and survived the war. Decades later, when her own granddaughter opened the doll's hollow body, the papers were still there, fragile, yellowed, yet legible. Each name written by her father became a voice resurrected from silence. The doll was no longer a toy but a vessel of remembrance, proof that love and memory can hide even in the smallest spaces. The Torn Scarf, Hungary, 1944. In the spring of 1944, as the German occupation of Hungary intensified, the deportations of Hungarian Jews began with devastating speed. Entire families were rounded up from towns and villages, forced into overcrowded cattle cars under the pretext of resettlement. Amid the confusion and terror, a mother faced the impossible, saying goodbye to her young daughter. Inside one of those dimly lit train cars, filled with frightened faces and the clatter of iron wheels, she tore her floral scarf in two. The fabric, once bright and soft, now frayed under trembling hands. She gave one half to her daughter, tucking it into her small coat pocket. "So we will find each other in heaven," she whispered, her voice breaking, not from weakness, but from a desperate act of love. That torn scarf became a symbol of everything that could not be destroyed: memory, love, and hope. Amid the machinery of annihilation, the gesture reclaimed humanity from the inhuman. The mother did not survive Auschwitz. But her daughter did. For decades, she kept the faded half-scarf folded in her dresser drawer. Time turned it fragile, but she could never bring herself to let it go. When she held it, she felt her mother's warmth, a promise that distance, fear, and even death could not sever. The story of the torn scarf reminds us that resistance can take many forms. Sometimes, it is the quiet act of holding on to love when everything else is taken away. And Frank's diary, written between 1942 and 1944, is one of the most significant personal accounts of the Holocaust. As a young Jewish girl, Anne and her family went into hiding in a secret annex in Amsterdam to escape Nazi persecution. During their time in hiding, Anne documented her thoughts, fears, hopes, and the everyday struggles of living under constant threat. Her writing offers a vivid and poignant look at the impact of the Holocaust on the lives of Jewish children and families. Through her words, Anne's experiences, her reflections on adolescence, relationships, and the horrors of war became a powerful reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. And Frank died in the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in 1945, just weeks before the camp was liberated, but her legacy lives on through her diary. The Diary of a Young Girl has been translated into numerous languages and continues to be read worldwide, ensuring that Anne's voice and the millions of other young lives lost are never forgotten. Irina Sendler, a Polish social worker, became one of the most courageous figures of the Holocaust for her role in saving 2,500 Jewish children from the Warsaw Ghetto. Operating under the guise of a health inspector for the Jewish social self-help organization, Sendler used false papers, secret tunnels, and a network of collaborators to smuggle children out of the ghetto. She placed them with non-Jewish families, in convents, and orphanages, ensuring their survival by erasing their Jewish identities and giving them a chance at life. Despite the immense personal risk, if caught, she would have been executed by the Nazis. Sendler's efforts were kept secret for years. After the war, she was honored by Yad Vashem as one of the righteous among the nations, a title given to non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. Her bravery and determination remain a testament to the power of individual courage in the face of systemic evil. Irina Sendler's story continues to inspire those who believe in the importance of standing up for others, no matter the cost. In 1943, during the Nazi occupation of Greece, the city of Thessaloniki, home to a thriving Sephardic Jewish community, became a key target for deportation. The Sephardic Jews of Thessaloniki were descendants of those expelled from Spain in the 15th century, and their community had deep cultural and religious roots in the city. Under German orders, approximately 50,000 Jews were rounded up and deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau, the notorious death camp. Despite some protests from the local population and even the Catholic Church, the Nazi regime pushed forward with its ruthless plan. The deportations began in March 1943, with families torn from their homes and forced into ghettos before being transported to Auschwitz in overcrowded cattle cars. Upon arrival, most were immediately sent to the gas chambers, and only a small number survived the brutal conditions of forced labor camps. The tragedy of Thessaloniki highlights the far-reaching horrors of the Holocaust, showing how the Nazis targeted Jewish communities across Europe. Nearly all the Jews from Thessaloniki perished, and their loss marked a devastating chapter in the history of Greek Jewry, erasing centuries of cultural heritage in a single, ruthless act of genocide. The story of the Jewish partisans in the forests of Belarus, 1941 to 1944. In Belarus, Jewish partisans formed underground resistance groups to fight against the Nazis during the Holocaust. They operated in the dense forests of Eastern Europe, using guerrilla tactics to sabotage Nazi supply lines, destroy railway tracks, and engage in armed combat with German forces. One of the most famous groups was led by Tuvia Bielski, whose brigade of Jewish fighters not only resisted the Nazis but also saved over 1,200 Jews by sheltering them in the forests. These partisans are remembered for their courage, their commitment to survival, and their efforts to protect innocent lives under extreme conditions. The story of the memorial at Yad Vashem, Israel, 1953. Yad Vashem, the World Holocaust Remembrance Center, was established in 1953 in Jerusalem to honor the memories of Holocaust victims. The center serves as a global symbol of remembrance, education, and research, and houses a vast collection of documents, photographs, and artifacts from the Holocaust. It also features a hall dedicated to the righteous among the nations, who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. Yad Vashem plays a crucial role in educating future generations about the Holocaust and the importance of human rights and tolerance. Its mission is to ensure that the lessons of the Holocaust are never forgotten. The liberation of Dachau on April 29, 1945, marked a pivotal moment in the Allied victory over Nazi Germany and was one of the first times the world saw the full scale of the atrocities committed within the Nazi concentration camp system. Dachau was the first concentration camp established by the Nazis, built in 1933 near Munich, Germany, as a model for later camps. Initially used to imprison political opponents, it later became a site for Jews, Roma, Soviet POWs, and other marginalized groups, with many subjected to forced labor, medical experiments, and brutal treatment. When American forces, specifically the 45th Infantry Division, arrived at Dachau, they found a scene of unimaginable suffering. Thousands of prisoners were in a state of emaciation, their bodies frail and weakened from starvation, disease, and exhaustion. Many were unable to move or speak. The survivors had endured years of brutal conditions, and the camp's infrastructure was collapsing in the face of Allied advances. The liberation of Dachau exposed the world to the true horror of the Nazi concentration camp system. As American soldiers entered the camp, they were confronted not only by the living but also by the bodies of the deceased, evidence of the systematic murder that had occurred within the camp. The images and testimonies from Dachau, including photographs and film footage, helped to reveal the scope of Nazi crimes and became crucial in the post-war effort to document and prosecute those responsible for the Holocaust. While the survivors of Dachau were freed from their captors, they faced a long and painful journey to recovery. Many had lost family members, suffered permanent physical and emotional trauma, and faced the difficult task of rebuilding their lives after the horrors they had endured. The liberation of Dachau remains a symbol of both the horrors of the Holocaust and the resilience of those who survived, serving as a stark reminder of the depths of human cruelty and the importance of remembrance and education. The Bielski partisans, led by Tuvia, Asel, Zuz, and Aaron Bielski, were a Jewish resistance group in the forests of Belarus during World War II. Unlike many other resistance movements that primarily focused on sabotage or combat, the Bielski brothers placed a significant emphasis on saving Jewish lives. They sheltered over 1,200 Jews, including women, children, and the elderly, offering them protection in the dense forest, far from the reach of Nazi forces and collaborators. Their efforts were multifaceted. In addition to engaging in combat against the Nazis, the Bielski partisans created a self-sustaining community in the forest. They built shelters, farmed, and developed strategies to survive the harsh conditions of the forest, all while protecting the vulnerable and maintaining a semblance of normal life. The Bielski brothers' decision to prioritize saving lives rather than solely focusing on military action made them stand out among other partisan groups. Their legacy is a testament to the power of resistance and survival, highlighting the importance of preserving humanity even in the most brutal circumstances. Their story remains an inspiring symbol of defiance, community, and hope during the Holocaust.